From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lines, I'm Joe Matthew.
President Biden meets with the leaders of South Korea and Japan following his critical face-to-face with China's Xi Jinping yesterday on the sidelines of the APEC summit in California. We have more with the U.S. ambassador to Japan, Rahm Emanuel.
Also at the APEC summit, Bloomberg's Emily Chang will have an extended conversation with Alphabet's Sundar Pichai on AI regulation, China, election integrity, and a lot more.
And the House Ethics Committee releases a scathing report on Congressman George Santos, prompting the promise of an expulsion resolution and the announcement he won't seek re-election. We'll get reaction from Representative Haley Stevens of Michigan. So, Joe, clearly a lot to talk about, even though Congress has left Washington for the holiday. There's still plenty going on, clearly on Capitol Hill, and, of course, a lot going on across the country as well as that APEC summit continues in the aftermath of the Biden-Xi meeting and Biden's remarks about it last night.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. You know, there are a lot of questions about what are the takeaways. Will there be anything in terms of deliverables? And there were. He talked about military-to-military cooperation. He talked about an agreement on counter-narcotics. But it was, for many people, what was said at the very end, the last question of his news conference last night, which he held solo, about whether he still thinks, after that meeting, that President Xi is a dictator. Why don't we listen to what he said? Here's the president from last night.
And Mr. President, after today, would you still refer to President Xi as a dictator? This is a term that you used earlier this year.
Well, look, he is. I mean, he's a dictator in the sense that he is a guy who runs a country that is a communist country that is based on a form of government totally different than ours.
So standing by what he said before.
Yeah.
I guess the question is, does that take anything a step backward from the progress that was made yesterday? Balance of Power co-anchor Anne-Marie Hordern is joining us now from the APEC summit in San Francisco. Anne-Marie, did that comment from the president really change anything tone-wise there today?
Well, that comment, I think you have to take and look at what Biden has said in the past. He's called Xi Jinping a dictator in the past. What is he going to do? Reversed how he changes and how he views the Chinese Communist Party after this meeting. And then we also have to remember we're going into an election year. President Biden has been criticized with the Republican Party for not being tough enough on China. There was no way he was going to not say, frankly, what he feels, but also that he still wants to make sure that he is talking tough when it comes to Xi Jinping. So I would just say that that comment was made as the president was walking out. It was an ad hoc question thrown to him, but it doesn't change really the tenor of this meeting. I mean, China obviously came out and said they strongly oppose those types of comments, didn't mention Biden by name, but the fact of the matter is they had some deliverables on the fringes of this meeting. A lot of those were set before the meeting happened, and the final win was just the fact that these two leaders actually met. And I think what you heard from President Biden countless times is he just wants to get back to some normal cadence when it comes to dealing with China and making sure that there's military-to-military communications, a huge priority, which when the president was here at the APEC CEO summit, that had huge applause from CEOs. And I think President Xi, for his part last night, sitting down with CEOs, he also wanted to strike a more conciliatory, dovish tone to really make sure businesses know that they don't want to be in a hot war or a cold war. They don't want to unseat the United States, and they're open for business.
Trust but verify was the phrase that Joe Biden took from Ronald Reagan in that conversation last evening. Anne-Marie, you're right. The reaction's been a lot more mild this time to when he used that dictator remark at a fundraiser a couple of months ago, which really seemed to actually set things back. But he actually had some moments in that news conference, Anne-Marie, that haven't made news. He said, I've spent more time with President Xi than any other world leader, recalling the fact that they were both vice presidents at the same time. How well do these two men know each other?
Well, I think to Biden's point, he talks about this all the time. He talks about the fact that they spent all this time in the Himalayas, and Xi Jinping said, explain one word that really resembles America, and Biden will always say it's possibilities. And he says this story all the time. And he feels as though when you look at all the world leaders around the stage, these two men have been around for quite some time. And yes, when they were both vice presidents, he says that President Obama wanted him to go spend some time with him. I do get the sense that Biden said that they made real progress and that they had a frank conversation. I don't think anything was held back in these about 3 or 4 hours or so they spent together.
Well, Anne-Marie, of course, when we're thinking about how long President Biden and President Xi have been in the political game, there's others at play here as well, including Rahm Emanuel, who has been a pretty outspoken China critic, who I know you spoke with later today. So we'll play more of that sound later on in the show. Anne-Marie Herder, thank you very much. We want to go now to a conversation, Joe, that is happening at that CEO summit. The CEO of Alphabet, Sundar Pichai, taking the stage right now alongside our Emily Chang. Let's listen in.
Mobile was the first transition, I think, in Asia. You almost co-developed it. I look at Android, it wouldn't have happened without all the work we did in Asia, our partners in Asia, be it Samsung or HTC in Taiwan and so on. But I think you started leapfrogging, and you don't need to play catch-up with legacy. I think AI takes it the next step further. I think it's the first technology. I think you're all in a real position to be right there from the start and have a seat as this technology develops. So I think that has profound implications. You all can be as AI native as what's happening in the US and so on. So I think in that way, it's going to have a big impact. I think the way you do that, though, is by, as APEC countries, I would say you have to have a pro-innovation mindset. You have to embrace it at the start. Make sure you have the right infrastructure in the country to facilitate AI innovation. You're thinking about the right balanced regulation, both from an innovation and safety standpoint. And then as government, maybe lead the way. What are the projects you can visibly do? How do you use AI to digitize services and serve your citizens better? I think if you lead the way and then invest in skilling, et cetera, I think there's a real chance. So I think it couldn't be more exciting.
India, your native country, is now the most populous country in the world. Do you see AI as a massive opportunity for India, or could it lead to a massive dislocation, given the number of lower-level coding, customer services jobs based there?
I do think it's going to be a massive opportunity, across. India has to make progress on many, many fundamental areas, right? Be it healthcare, agriculture, food security, climate change, and so on. So an AI is going to help us make progress. So it is a big opportunity. I think even on the labor market, a few things I would say. There's a study from MIT economist David Order that if you look at today, a vast majority of jobs that exist today are in new specialties or categories that have come about since 1940. So in some ways, this can be counterintuitive. Over the last 20 years, we've all worried about automation, and it hasn't quite played out the way we have predicted it. Having said that, I think your question is important. I think for many jobs, it also has an opportunity to play it out in a much better way, right? Make the jobs easier to do. Like, if you can imagine, how do you have radiologists to cover India's breadth of population? AI can actually help expand access. But finally, there are a category of jobs where there will be a shift. And I think that's where the only way to make progress, no one can do it alone. You have to invest in the hard work of skilling and workforce transition. That's true for India. That's true for every country in the world, I think.
You've met with President Biden on AI in Washington, Prime Minister Sunak on AI in London. How do we get to global consensus on smart AI regulation?
It's not going to be easy, but I would start from this premise that AI will proliferate. So this is not the inherent nature of software. AI advances will get out to all countries. And so it is naturally the kind of technology, I don't think there is any unilateral safety to be had. We all have a shared incentive to solve for safety. You could have AI go wrong in one country that will impact every other country. So in some ways, it's like climate change in the planet. We all share a planet. I think that's true for AI. So now that you know that will be true, I think you have to start building the frameworks globally to make progress. I've seen encouraging progress. When the G7 happened in Hiroshima, I think it was a good start. You've seen more progress. The UK AI Summit last week, the administration here, the White House has been leading the way as well. And I saw good, encouraging announcements even yesterday for US and China to start having a dialogue on AI.
Well, that was my next question. Should Chinese regulators be part of this conversation on AI regulation?
My sense is there is no way you make progress over the long term without China and the US deeply talking to each other on something like AI. So I think that has got to be an integral part of how you make progress. So I think I'm glad to see it. And we have to lay the foundations. The good thing is we are still in early days of the technology. So laying the foundations now will allow us to work through the tough issues and build a common framework over time.
Google and other big tech companies have been criticized for pushing self-serving regulation and pulling up the ladder behind them in a way that will stifle AI innovation among startups. How do you respond to that?
Quite the opposite. Pretty much on most areas we have worked on, we have deeply supported open innovation. If you look at things like Android or Chrome, these are all big open source projects. Most of the current AI revolution is based on work which we have published as a company and shared with the world. And I think as we move ahead, open source is going to play a critical role in driving AI innovation forward. And I think we have to be careful not to do regulation in a way that either harms open source technologies or smaller companies. So I actually think we care about that. Having said that, I think we are also being asked to contribute for how would you tackle AI safety, right? And so we have to think through issues like that. I don't see this as being at odds with each other. For example, next year about 2.5 billion people around the world would participate in an election.
Right. The biggest election in history is going to be happening in India.
Yeah, that's right. And many more countries around the world, including the US. Mm-hmm. So maybe almost 1 in 3 people in the world may participate in an electoral process next year. So how do you think about, generative AI, causing misinformation there? These are real problems. So we are thinking through areas like that, but I think that is not that shouldn't hinder innovation because of the opportunity we talked about earlier. So we think about this framework as being bold and responsible at the same time. And I think it's important to do both, and I think that's true for governments as well.
We've already seen, as it pertains to India, 3D generated holograms of Prime Minister Modi, AI generated voice and songs. How do you think AI, and obviously the US presidential election coming up as well, how do you think AI is going to further test election integrity?
I think, over time, it's going to lower the barrier for creating, artificial information, which may or may not mirror what's happening in the real world, right? And that barrier will come down. Mm-hmm. So in this cat and mouse game, how do we amp up our defenses against that? We are in early stages, right? We were one of the first companies to announce a watermarking technology for image generation. It's called SynthID, done by DeepMind, and we are providing API access to it. But all of us need to tackle it. These are areas where regulation will have to play a role, right? I think governments will have to, over time, pass regulations about what is okay for some of this synthetic content, and so which is why I think you have to think about it together.
OpenAI CEO Sam Altman has said repeatedly he wants to know more about what's happening with AI in China. What do you know and what do you not know about where China is on AI?
Look, I think they're making, from what I can tell, they're making deep investments in AI. The scale of AI research talent in China is just simply astounding to see. So I think, in some ways, this question, China is going to be at the forefront of AI, and I think that's a given. And so the question is, how do we work over time, both for other countries to make sure making progress in AI, and over time, how do we develop the frameworks where countries can coexist peacefully in a world in which AI will be everywhere.
President Biden actually just said he doesn't see the U.S. decoupling with China, but the world does seem to be on a path to two separate internets. Do we continue in that direction, and what does that mean?
It's tough to say. Things go through in phases. I think we are definitely in a phase where there are more forces pulling it apart. But inherently, these technologies also facilitate easy exchange of information. So I think there are countervailing forces as well. So I think it's tough to predict. I do think information wants to flow freely by nature. So my hope is over time, things do couple back again.
Could AI or cloud, some of these newer businesses that Google has been building, could that be a path back into China for Google?
Today our presence in China is limited, and we are definitely focused on. We deeply partner with governments around the world. In fact, one of the big opportunities we have with cloud and AI is many governments are working, and they are thinking about how to incorporate AI to transform their services to their citizens, improve their infrastructure, et cetera. So it's an area where we really focus on, but not necessarily vis-a-vis China.
Now, the conversation around AI is super polarized. Either we're headed toward human extinction and the robocalypse, or we're all going to have superpowers. Which one is it?
I'm optimistic, right? I think as humanity, we have harnessed every technology to our benefits. And more than any other technology, I've seen us be worried about it at its earliest stages. So in some ways, that gives me hope. I do think we have to be very optimistic because it can really, drive progress, at a fundamental level, be it scientific discovery, like we are seeing with AlphaFold at Google. So I think there's a lot of optimism to be had. But I think we have to work hard to harness it. But that is true of every other technological advance we've had before. It was true of the Industrial Revolution. And I think we can learn from those things, act earlier, to work hard at making sure there's a better outcome. So I'm optimistic on it. Yeah.
You pivoted Google to an AI-first company in 2016, and yet there's still this perception that Google is somehow missing the boat on AI. Are you behind? Are you behind OpenAI?
Look, credit to them for, I think, ChatGPT was a great product with a great product market fit. But when I look at, we've been incorporating AI in our products for a long time. A lot of the underlying technology is built from Google. We are building our next generation of models with Gemini. And I am extraordinarily excited at the innovation coming ahead. If anything, I look ahead, I think we built the company for this moment. I expect it to be a golden age of innovation ahead, and can't wait to bring out the innovations to more people.
So tell us more about Gemini. Give us a glimpse. This is something that's been touted as a magic ingredient for search. What have you seen and how transformative is it going to be?
I think all of us are trying to push the state of the art of where generative AI is. Our goal with Gemini, is to put out a state of the art model, right? That's where we would start with Gemini 1.0, and then add more innovations, truly make them multimodal, bring in features like memory and planning in, and so on. But we are focused on getting it out. I view Gemini as a series of models. We are focused on getting Gemini 1.0 out as soon as possible, make sure it's competitive, state of the art, and build from there on.
Google just invested $2 billion in Anthropic. Microsoft, of course, has billions in OpenAI. I recently sat down with Lina Khan, who's the chair of the U.S. Federal Trade Commission, and she said they're hearing concerns that big tech companies are extending their power by investing not just money, but also sharing their clouds with these AI startups. Is that fair? Can innovators succeed and startups succeed without allying themselves with big tech?
Well, it all depends on the details. And, in these deals, when we do with these companies, we are also enabling them because of our cloud technology. And we don't have a controlling stake in any of these companies. So they are independent companies in which we are a technology provider, right? And I think I actually would make the argument the opposite way. If you just look at the last year, look at all the new names we are talking about. To me, it shows that we are in an incredibly dynamic moment again. And yes, I think we have to play a role in enabling the next generation of companies, which is what cloud does. Cloud allows us to take the same technology that Google is built on and actually share it with everyone else. So I think, if anything, it's pro-innovation, and so I think there's a lot of good things about it.
You've been spending some time in Washington lately. There are a couple big trials underway. The US Justice Department, for one, is trying to prove that Google is a monopoly, a search monopoly. Google does dominate 90% of search, which is 90% of how we see and experience the world. It's hard to get information and not use Google. Why should any one company have that much power?
I genuinely think we don't have that position. We are not 90% of users' information needs. I look at my kids' generation on their phone. They have access to the entire world's information at their fingertips. They're getting a lot of their information from social media. They get to go to wherever they want. And so, those are, people don't always go to a general search engine for information. And that plays out in the ads market, too. I think we've just talked about, when I look at how much tech is constantly innovating, and we have to work hard every year, there's irony in your questions of, aren't you in this position, and aren't you behind? So both can be true at the same time. So it's clearly a dynamic moment, and I'm glad we get a chance to make that case. And so I think the facts will speak for themselves.
Some of Google's work with governments around the world has gotten pushback from your own employees. Obviously, we've got the world watching the Israel-Hamas war right now. You've got a contract, Project Nimbus, whereby Google provides cloud and AI services, along with Amazon's AWS, to the Israeli military and government. Can you give us an update on that project?
It's very much in line with what I said earlier. We work with governments around the world. We think it's a responsibility. AI is an important technology. How do you use it to modernize your country's infrastructure and your services? Project Nimbus this was a RFP from Israel's Ministry of Finance to modernize their digital infrastructure, and that's the project, and we're proud to be doing Project Nimbus like we do with many governments around the world.
There was, Russia, Ukraine, now we've got Israel and Hamas. How do you think about wielding Google's geopolitical power in a time of conflict?
Look, I view us as a partner to, like-minded governments which share democratic values around the world. I think we can be a critical technology partner. I think we want to participate in important issues that affect these countries, be it skilling and educating their workforce, be it bringing access to more knowledge and information, and that's the role, and be it helping them build out their digital infrastructure, including AI. And I think that's the role. We don't see it in a geopolitical context. We see it in an enabling context. We want to be partners to these companies. And there are times information plays an important role in these moments, and we want to get those moments right. And so that's the way I think about it.
Mm-hmm. Google and so much, not every government is like-minded, right? Google and so much of US tech relies on Taiwan for chips. If tensions escalate between Taiwan and China, how big a threat is that to the US tech industry, and is enough being done to mitigate that risk?
This goes beyond Google. I think in today's world, a lot of the semiconductor manufacturing technology, comes out of the innovation from Taiwan. And, that's a dependency which exists. And so, but this is not a unique Google thing. And, my sense is it'll be that way for a long time to come.
8 years ago, you changed Google's motto. Google changed its motto from "Don't be evil" to "Do the right thing." What does it mean to do the right thing in an AI-powered world?
Hopefully AI will also help us, give inputs to it. But look, I think it has to be grounded in the fundamental values of humanity, human rights, and universal human values we all agree on has got to be the foundation for it. And you have to build it up from there. Mm-hmm. And there'll be a lot of debate about it, but that's the foundational thing I would go back to. And as long as AI reflects the essence of what's innately good about humanity, I think we'll be okay.
Everyone likes to ask you what keeps you up at night, and I'm curious right now, this year, what do you worry about?
Look, I'm excited because it's an extraordinary moment of innovation. When I look at the pace of activity, even at Google, it reminds me of Google's earliest days. So there's a lot of energy I get from that, innovation, because it plays out and it'll drive benefits in the world. I do worry about many things, making sure we are meeting the moment and moving fast as a company, to making sure, to the election question we talked about, getting it right and a responsibility to do so. So it's a balance of all of that.
All right. Sundar Pichai, CEO of Google, thank you for spending your time with us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was Alphabet CEO Sundar Pichai speaking with Bloomberg's Emily Chang at the APEC CEO Summit in San Francisco. Joe, a really fascinating conversation. A lot of it centered on AI, and especially in light of the last 24 hours, the meeting we saw between President Biden and Xi. Yeah. Interesting to hear him say that the U.S. and China are going to have to collaborate on this. He actually called it critical to progress and said China is going to be at the forefront of AI. Even as we try to restrict access to these technologies, the GPUs that you need from NVIDIA to forward this AI process, can't get those in China. So I'm not sure how they're going to feel about that collaboration, but I suspect that they would like to talk to the U.S. about it. Amazing company here. He talks like he's running his own government as he describes working with governments. Well, when you think about the size of Alphabet, it does compare to some governments. These big tech companies are, in fact, very big. So stick with us on Balance of Power. We have a lot more to talk about, including returning back to what's happening here in Washington, D.C. Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens of Michigan will join us next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV.
I believe they're some of the most constructive and productive discussions we've had. I've been meeting with President Xi since both of us were vice president over 10 years ago. Today, build on the groundwork we laid over the past several months of high-level diplomacy between our teams. We've made some important progress, I believe. The United States will continue to compete vigorously with the PRC, but we'll manage that competition responsibly so it doesn't veer into conflict.
President Biden speaking in San Francisco on the heels of his meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping yesterday. Joining us now for more is Democratic Representative Haley Stevens of Michigan. She, of course, also is a member of the House's China Select Committee. Congresswoman, thank you very much for joining us this evening. There were some real tangible outcomes of this meeting between Biden and Xi on fentanyl, on military-to-military communications. Was there anything, though, that was not accomplished that you would have liked to have seen out of this meeting?
Well, I'm certainly curious to engage the administration in the trade conversation and how we continue to level the playing field, particularly as a representative here in Michigan, where our auto industry just has concluded some pretty historic negotiations, really setting the standards for workers across not only this country, but across the world. And so how do we compete as a manufacturing destination? How do we make sure that the raw materials, the critical minerals that we get access to are at fair price and allow us to compete? That's what I'm interested in and part of my role on the Select Committee. And I'd also say, look, it has been one heck of a year with regard to U.S.-China relations, starting with the balloon, carrying forward to cyber attacks, broken meetings, some trust breakdown, and now this week, this very historic meeting. And I applaud these leaders. Certainly, we don't agree with China on everything, but one of the other resounding messages is that we're going to have to find ways to work together as economic powerhouses. And particularly for both of our countries' interests, that opportunity for dialogue is critical. It is very important. But let's take it to the next stage. Let's do trade.
Well, we're hearing a lot about Dictator and his recent remark on that. The president was asked last night if he still thinks that the president of China is a dictator. He said, well, he is one, following his choice to use that word a couple of weeks back at a fundraiser. Congresswoman, is it possible to partner to the extent that you're talking about with a dictator? Do you agree with him?
I've been thinking a lot about this because here we are right on the heels of a new marker in time, 25 years nearly into this century. Global orders shifting, changing, certainly economies are changing. And not to get overly philosophical on the show, but I would say that we cannot normalize brutality. We cannot normalize that there is a Uyghur genocide going on in China and that business executives aren't allowed to talk about it. We can't normalize that the uptick of Chinese business leaders are now being disappeared in their own country. We saw that certainly with a tennis star. We have to go into this with eyes wide open. We also have to face the reality that our supply chains and our economies are tied together. China was allowed into the WTO. We can't go back into time and change that and reverse course. I've heard directly from the makers of the Apple iPhone that they can't produce iPhones or any type of smartphone anywhere else in the world. So this is sort of a toggle, right? It's not justifying, it's knowing what we're up against and who we're dealing with.
Of course, Congresswoman, it is one of the geopolitical challenges that the U.S. is dealing with, but there's many other geopolitical challenges around the world, including the ongoing conflict in Ukraine with Russia and, of course, Israel's war with Hamas. The continuing resolution that your body and the Senate successfully passed this week didn't include funding for either Israel or Ukraine. What do you think a realistic timeline is to get that passed?
This is incredibly disappointing. That we have not passed an aid package, particularly for Israel in one of the gravest, most serious moments that this country has faced, certainly since the Yom Kippur War. And we need to step up and support our allies. The running theme here is that democracies are under attack. You've got Ukraine being invaded again by an autocracy. You have Israel that has been attacked by a terrorist operation with links to Iran and certainly with funding from Iran, and that needs to be put at bay. Democracy needs to be able to thrive. Now, we, as it relates to China, have been battling for 25 years plus how to bring them along. How to get on the same page. And that hasn't happened, which is why, yes, the president doesn't need to concede that Xi isn't a dictator. I believe he is as well. But we also can't just have no dialogue and no conversation. And what we want to avoid is further military attacks on democracy. And that is why Taiwan is also on my mind and why I want to see an aid package come forward that invests in Ukraine, invests in Israel, and invests in Taiwan.
We have to ask you about what's going on in Detroit quickly, Congresswoman. I'm looking at a tweet right now, or an X, from Elon Musk. Tweets a photograph of himself shaking hands with President Xi. It says, "May there be prosperity for all." I know that workers at the UAW are concerned about prosperity, and they ratified a contract today at GM. You've been in the middle of this. You've walked the picket line. I know that this impacts a lot of folks in your district in Michigan. Will this lead to ratifications for the other two, Ford and Stellantis?
Well, we've certainly seen the business leader getting possessed by Twitter to the degree that they lose sight of their mission at hand. And I'm thinking about a unfortunate twice impeached president. So in terms of how Elon Musk decides to spend his time, I find it really quite questionable, given that he supposedly runs several multi-billion-dollar businesses and one that he just crashed into the ground. Or seemingly crashed into the ground. But I will say this, I remain really optimistic about what is going to come from Ford and Stellantis. These negotiations were tough. That led to a long strike, an unprecedented strike. It showcased the strength of our workers. And now what you see across the auto industry are wage increases in a time when inflation is very real. And so I think we're going to see these deals get ratified and certainly continue to respect the process.
Finally, Congresswoman, speaking of process, of course, there was a ethics committee report on Congressman George Santos, the Republican from New York, released earlier today, in which they said, and this is a partial quote, Santos sought to fraudulently exploit every aspect of his House candidacy for his own personal financial profit. It goes on to say he sustained all of this through a constant series of lies to his constituents, donors, and staff about his background and experience. Of course, the chair of the Ethics Committee, Chairman Guest, has said he will be putting an expulsion resolution on the floor tomorrow. What is your degree of confidence that Republicans would actually vote to oust Mr. Santos?
Well, look, their political reality is that they have a tight majority, and it is only getting tighter. We just swore in a new Democrat member of Congress, Gabe Amo, the first person of color to represent Rhode Island in the United States Congress in their 200-plus year history, which was a really exciting moment in our Congress. And certainly if Mr. Santos gets expelled, it only makes their majority tighter. And Lord knows if we take more speaker votes, I certainly want to cast that vote for Hakeem Jeffries and see him become the Speaker of the House if such an event would occur. But I'll say this on a very serious note with regard to Mr. Santos and his illegal behavior and activities. It is wholly unbecoming of a member of Congress to do what he did and a candidate for Congress to do what he did. You cannot abuse campaign contributions. The ethics report is damning. Mr. Guest's resolution should be treated seriously. I plan to vote for it. And if we do see Mr. Santos expelled, he will be the 6th member in the history of the body to be expelled. Yeah. So it's serious. It's unfortunate that he got as far as he did, and we have to deal with it.
Wholly unbecoming, the words from Haley Stevens. Congresswoman, it's good to see you. Thanks for your time, as always. Coming up, President Biden says he still believes Xi Jinping is a dictator. After their meeting, we're going to get more on that with our political panel next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV.
And Mr. President, after today, would you still refer to President Xi as a dictator? This is a term that we used earlier this year.
Well, look, he is. I mean, he's a dictator in the sense that he is a guy who runs a country that is a communist country that is based on a form of government totally different than ours.
But did he plan to say that? President Biden, after meeting with Xi Jinping yesterday, the dictator remark, the second time we've heard that past couple of months. Let's assemble our political panel for their take on all of this. Alvin Jordan's here, Vice President at Rock Solutions, and Sarah Chamberlain, the President and CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership. Great to see you both here, and thanks for coming along. Alvin, was he saying that for you or for Sarah? Because I keep hearing that members of both parties, for instance, on the China Select Committee, would not have been satisfied if he hadn't gone for the dictator remark, if he had suggested there was some thawing here. Maybe a better way to ask it, was that for the domestic audience?
You know, actually, I was asking myself that same question earlier. Yeah. I was like, who is this message actually for? And I think when you think of just, you know, the short list of things that actually can unite the country, China opposition to China is definitely at the top of the list, right? And so I think it was more so, you know, the president being consistent at least. But I think given, you know, I mean, we had members of Congress that were asking for full list of, you know, attendees to receptions after the conference. And I mean, if that's the approach, then I think this is an instance where the president, you know, I believe he went off script a bit here. Yeah. But like, this is where you do it, right? To like let everyone know, hey, I did this, I didn't like it, I still feel this way, and we'll move forward. And so I think it was a bit of that in his intention, or at least I hope.
Well, and some of this isn't even just a matter of feeling. It's about definitions to a large extent, Sarah. I have the Oxford definition of a dictator pulled up in front of me, and it says a person who behaves in an autocratic way. It's not necessarily inaccurate, but doesn't mean that you say it out loud when this is a position or a relationship that you are trying to get into a better position.
So I think he planned to say that. I think it was actually a smart move that he did. And I don't see that the Chinese are upset that he said it. I think he took it as a compliment. And he certainly did make the Republicans happy, because we've been saying that for months and months, that we have to deal with China. So I actually give Biden a point here on this one.
Very interesting. Was the meeting a success as a whole? When you look at military-to-military communication, counter-narcotics, that was supposed to be a nod to conservatives, to Republicans who have been beating the drum on this. Those are real deliverables.
They seem to be. We're very thrilled with those. We'll see how it plays out, but it's certainly a great first step. And it's really nice to just have them talking again. I mean, we are the two world powers.
I feel like
we need to be at the table together.
We can't underscore that enough, because we get obsessed with deliverables and what's the readout going to be. The market was celebrating the fact that they were in the same room, which says a lot.
Well, the market doesn't like uncertainty.
Absolutely.
And perhaps a certain degree of uncertainty around just, will this meeting go okay or not? Will the U.S. and China get on a better page? Was removed a bit. But when we think about what the deliverables actually were, Alvin, on fentanyl, on military communications, just talking seems to be an accomplishment. Is this a case of the bar just having been set really low, and that's why this trip looks successful?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there hadn't been any discussions between the two of them in, a year at least. And so I think, when we started talking about, what is actually happening here, I think the actual exercise is just, as important, at least today, as the actual deliverable of it all. And so I think the fact that, and this came, from their party as well, which is just the fact that it is almost impossible for China and America not to have these conversations. So I think it's a win for the administration to be able to say, we walked in, we stood on our points that, we kind of all are aligned on, and we'll try to make progress along those lines.
We're agreeing way too much around the table.
I know.
I'm going to veer into something here, because first I need to give credit to our colleague Sarah Chamberlain for getting it right twice. First time told us the government's not shutting down when everybody said it was going to happen. And I believe last week at this time you said, I'm not feeling great about it, but at the last minute they're going to pull it out. They actually got it done early, which is pretty remarkable.
I was not expecting that.
So, well, listen, kudos to you. I talked earlier today with Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary, on Bloomberg Sound On, to talk about whether a Republican president, if that's where this goes, would interfere with the implementation of the infrastructure bill. It was the 2-year anniversary of the signing yesterday, and they were out in force today to try to deliver that message of what has happened. But what if Joe Biden doesn't win in the next election? Here's what he said.
When politics interfere, it's never good. I mean, we saw that recently with these shutdown threats. That would have slowed us down or even stopped us on vital things like air traffic control, hiring, which I think we all recognize we need to be doing more, not less. Right now, we have a congressional GOP in the House that is proposing major cuts that would cut our ports program. It would cut the program we've used to build safer railroad infrastructure. So I do worry about that.
So that's the message from the administration today by way of the transportation secretary. How real are those concerns? Should he be worried that those cuts are coming?
No, I don't think so. I mean, President Trump had talked about doing a transportation bill for almost all 4 years that he was there. That was a very bipartisan bill. The members of Main Street really like what's the projects going on in their districts. This will not get stopped. This is full ahead, no matter who becomes the president.
Can I ask quickly what you would say to him, also kind of poking at Republicans who voted against the infrastructure bill but hold ribbon-cutting ceremonies when the money comes to town? Is that just Washington?
It's Washington's politics. I mean, that's what they do.
Grow up?
Yes, grow up.
Okay.
I mean, all right, well, really. We got a lot of Washington politics still to cover, so our panel is going to be sticking with us, because coming up, we have to talk about Congressman George Santos. He's not going to run for re-election to his seat in the House, and the Ethics Committee released a pretty scathing report about him. We'll have all that next with our political panel. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV.
Top line is incredibly concerning. And the ultimate punishment that can be handed out is expulsion. And I'm going to review the report before finalizing that decision.
That was Republican Representative Brian Stile of Wisconsin earlier on Sound On, as Congressman George Santos says he will not run for re-election to his seat in the House after the House Ethics Panel released its report on him today. And now the ethics chairman separately is going to put an expulsion resolution on the floor tomorrow. Let's bring back our political panel. Alvin Jordan, Vice President at Rock Solutions, and Sarah Chamberlain, Republican Main Street Partnership President and CEO. So, Sarah, you know these Republican members.
Yes, I do. Brian
Are they going to kick him out of there?
They're going to try. So the Republican Main Street Partnership, we have all the New York delegation except for Santos, though he did try to join us.
Really?
He did.
You did let him
early
in?
on. Oh, yeah. He came to an event. Yeah, it's like, oh. But the reality is they'd like him gone. What's happening is bleeding into their districts. It's affecting them. And actually, we think if he does go, we can have a chance of holding the seat. If he doesn't go, we think the Democrats will pick it up. So, yes, I mean, they would really, we did the petition before to try to get him to leave. The chairman of Ethics Committee is the chairman of Main Street, so we're in hopes that this time he will depart. We realize, though, it's going to be a closer margin. So we are a little concerned about the numbers in the House, but it's more important to have him leave.
Though that could be a wash depending on what happens in Utah, right? If that goes the way Republicans hope. Alvin, I hate asking Brian Stile a question like that, and he probably hated answering it. Democrats love answering it. What's the strategy to turn that seat, to flip that seat in New York?
I think the process has kind of already pushed us there. I think back to a few weeks ago, and, kind of the rank and file, like having the support of Santos kind of through the process and due process being kind of a main talking point. But the report, as you mentioned, was scathing. Like one of the major lines, at least that I took away, was the fact that it said George Santos cannot be trusted. And I think the fact that is, right. And I think that kind of sets the table for just a change or fresh perspective in a seat that up until this point is one where I think a lot of people, lost trust in.
But I would tell you, we brought it to the floor. The Democrats did not support the Republicans that tried to oust him. So obviously they lost the vote about 2 weeks ago. We were a little disappointed with that. We thought Democrats would be like, yes, let's clean up the House.
31 of them voted not to expel George Santos, right? I do want to call attention to a statement that was put out by one of the spokesmen for Speaker Johnson, Raj Shah, that reads in part, the Speaker has reviewed the report and its troubling findings. It ends by saying Speaker Johnson encourages all involved to consider the best interests of the institution as this matter is addressed further. Does that give us any sense, Alvin, of how the Speaker is going to approach this?
I mean, I think he said it like, hey, if we're all on the same page here and reading the same things, we have to get rid of him. And I think that if this is allowed to continue to go on, it's just not something that's in the benefit of the Republican Party for sure.
I'm fascinated that you see this. Correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like you see this as an opportunity to show the conference putting the institution over the party. And then, as you point out, and I haven't heard anyone say this yet, actually maybe live to see another day where you could keep that seat.
Absolutely. So as Republicans, we believe in the structure of the House. He needs to go. There are a couple good Republicans sitting in that seat that we may be able to keep it, but we have to get Santos removed before we can fight to replace him with a Main Street conservative.
Great to have both of you back here with us. Big thanks to Sarah Chamberlain and Alvin Jordan for a smart talk, as always. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter. I'll point you to the terminal and online. It's waiting for you now.
Yep, and Joe will be waiting for you here tomorrow. We've almost made it to Friday, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg.